Philip Baideme, Speech 1110, Section WB. A serial killer, mass murderer, or perhaps a gladiator fighting to the death in an ancient Roman Colosseum. But you wouldn't think that it would be describing a sport in our current modern day society. However, these descriptions have been used more than once to describe what is the fastest growing sport in America today, MMA, or better known as mixed martial arts. The popularity you can see through the most current event, which housed close to 60,000 people in attendance and over 1 million pay-per-view events. The most recognized division of the sport today, the UFC, has showed and aired on television in the U.S. over 130 events to date. The competitors have taken on various nicknames. Some have helped the sport lose or shed its violent reputation, while others, such as the axe murderer, the assassin, crippler, or the maniac, have done little to change skeptics' minds. Mixed martial arts begin as early as the Greco-Roman period. According to Plukov's Combat Sport in the Ancient World, the mainstream academic view of the origin of MMA came about by pancration, which translates to total contest or all combat. It was a combination of boxing and wrestling, and it developed in the 7th century BC and was introduced into the Greek Olympic Games. In the early 1900s, there's mixed fighting style events started taking place around Europe and in the Japan area. And according to Graham Noble's Journal of Manly Arts, Bartitsu was founded by Edward Wright, and that was a prime example of MMA migrating from the wrestling and the boxing variations and started to incorporate martial arts such as judo and jiu-jitsu. MMA was first introduced to the U.S. in 1993 by the UFC. Royce Gracie and his family introduced that as a way to determine which martial art was the best. Royce Gracie entered the first tournament and won by defeating 3 opponents in less than 5 minutes in a single night. According to Kid Pellegrino's book, The Gracie Way, this actually was the spark that revolutionized mixed martial arts as we know it today. The answer that the Gracie family tried to do with the UFC to find out what martial art was the best did that, as well as much more. For instance, the event started to show which martial arts strengths and weaknesses were the best, and then fighters began to train in all of the strong parts of different martial arts and none of the weak parts, and eventually started to develop what we know today as the Ultimate Fighters. Originally, the UFC touted that there were no rules. In reality, there was actually 2 rules: no biting and no eye gouging. Everything else, though, was allowed. This actually created quite the controversy, especially in the United States. So most states actually started to ban the events. You couldn't watch them on television, and that in turn caused the UFC to start to implement various rules throughout the years. Recent changes by the New Jersey State Athletic Commission began in 2000, and they began to create various rules in place to reduce the danger to different competitors, as well as increase acceptance of the violent sport that it was. According to a recent article in the Journal of Sports and Science, after the adoption of the new rules, the injury rate currently for sanctioned mixed martial arts events is similar to what we'd see in boxing. There's been only 2 reported deaths in the sport in the last decade. Some of the rules that the Athletic Commission or the UFC implemented one was gloves. This helped reduce the injuries to the fighter's hands for breaking and the wrist as well as reducing the cuts to the opponent's face, which could end a fight rather quickly due to the blood loss. They also introduced mouth guards as a mandatory rule. This reduced the dental bills for the fighters and from the loss of teeth, as well as doctor bills from removing teeth from knuckles or the feet of the attackers. Also, the referee was allowed at that time to remove, or actually to stop fights if he felt that the fighter was no longer able to intelligently defend himself. They also introduced weight classes, which one of the big reasons was as submissions begin to become more widely known, the weight made a real big difference, and so to make it more competitive for the fighters, as well as providing additional layer of safety for the smaller fighters. Another rule was time limits. There was 3 5-minute rounds currently in pro fights, with 5 5-minute rounds for championship fights. This reduced the amount of time that a fighter could sustain injury while not losing the interest of the spectator. Those are only a few rules out of approximately what is 100 rules right now that make up the unified mixed martial arts rules. Mixed martial arts, or MMA, or what's commonly just referred to as the UFC today, captured my interest when I first watched the first live event in the early 90s. Since then, I've watched close to 1,000 fights, trained in mixed martial arts as well as competed in the sport. In this time, it's my belief that the most common reason for negative views or views that it's too violent is just a lack of understanding of mixed martial arts as it is today versus what it was back in the Greco-Roman period, where sometimes they would fight to the death. As the knowledge increases, I think a lot of this negative views will go away. And if you have any of these views regarding the MMA competition, I'd encourage you to read through the current MMA rules for the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board, and that's located on their website. Thank you.